Hello, everyone, and welcome back to We Know Scripted TV and our coverage of Rings of Power Season 2. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and with me today is Grace. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing well. I watched the finale of the Rings of Power, the season finale. I saw something today. Does it say it's almost renewed for season 3? It's a news
Yeah,
drop I
like
saw.
approaching confirmation
What the?
of Season 3 renewal.
That sounds like maybe you sent the tweet out too early. I think. But that's okay. We watched the finale, in which I thought it was perfectly good. That's what I'll say. I think perfectly fine and good.
Yeah, I thought it was fine. Yeah, I definitely I feel like I had hopes for more this season. I feel like I was really enjoying it in the early parts of the season, maybe even the middle part of the season. Uh the finale it served its purpose, and we're gonna continue on, and we're gonna keep vibing out in Middle Earth, and I'm gonna continue to enjoy the show. But honestly, like I talked last time about how it's still like a show that I will like put on and pay attention to, and it kind of stretched that limit for me with this finale. I was just like very little of it was not what I expected it to be, and unfortunately, it felt like everything that I did expect it delivered a little bit worse than I wanted it to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that once again, I think that a continuation of sort of the epiphany we had about the show, or like our ability to articulate what is working and what is not working in the show, is only exasperated by the finale episode, which is that like they will have some moments that are undoubtedly cool. And I would actually say the best moments of this episode is the opening scene
Yep.
and the end scene. And those were very, very good. They're very cool. And I'm like, that's pretty rad. How we got to all of them and all the stuff we did in between, I don't know. And there's a really good example, Taryn, of the thing that you said last week, which I feel like I'm more okay, I think, with the writing and specifically the dialogue writing, I think, than you are. I put that in my like strengths column, and you're like, I'm feeling like I can predict the line right before it happens. I still think I put it in my pro column. I think especially having just read Lord of the Rings, like all the books, that I feel
Mhm.
like, I don't know, it does feel like it. I think. I don't know. I think that it does feel Tolkien-esque. But there's a moment this episode where literally the like we didn't need it because the metaphor and all of the things that we did to like play into the themes have happened, and then they have a scene where they're like two characters are like, so you were the themes of the thing you were talking about, that's the thing that I just did, right? And he's like, you got me. And then it's Tom Bombadil and Gandalf, where they're like they do the whole thing, and then they're like, you want to have a scene where we talk about how I did all the things about the theme? Like, yeah. Then they sing. Like, oh my god, so silly. He's like, it was a test. Like, I know it was a test. It would have been more cool if you just let it be a test instead of being like going back. So I think a continuation of everything we said last week, and maybe even a little bit more disappointing because it's a finale, Taryn.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's a finale definitely doesn't help. But yeah, the Gandalf stuff.
I can't believe it's Gandalf.
Listen, like I said, like I obviously came up with my headcanon theory of like, oh, what if this was Saruman? That would be kind of cool. I didn't really think it would be true, nor was I expecting it to be true. I was very much was expecting this to be Gandalf. And honestly, I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna be that. I've read a lot of people talking about like it's gonna be lame if it's gonna be Gandalf because why would you take so long? It's not even properly canon for it to be Gandalf. It's just like lots of reasons why it would be disappointing that it would be Gandalf. I was not quite in that camp. I was like, yeah, you're right. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but at least it'll be cool when they do the reveal, right? Like they'll have like a cool reveal. Um, and
Did I
the
miss 5 minutes
reveal
of the
was
episode? The
I'm
cool
Gandalf, aren't I?
yeah, yeah. They
Like
already
they Hodored
they,
it, but without the fun Hodor stuff.
they already did the thing where they said Grandalf. They already did that piece of this right. Then they're like, have another character just be like, bye Grandalf, and he's like, Grandalf. Oh my god. It's like, oh my god. All right. this has not been a show that I have felt is worthy of like getting mad, and it probably still isn't. But the thing that you just said about how it's like you're like blah, blah, and I don't even care about continuity. I don't care
Yeah,
about
me
the
neither.
lore. I do not care. They already have to adjust so much stuff that it doesn't really matter to me when all the Istari came down and when they were planted, and seemingly they came in the third age, but they're going to have them be in the second age because all the stuff they want to do in the show is about stuff that happens in the second age, but they also want the wizards in the show. Fine, I don't care. Why did you spend 16 episodes to just be like, I think it might be Gandalf. Why did you do it? Why? It's fine now. We can move forward. But the other thing that they didn't tell us who the Dark Wizard. He just says he's not a Dark Wizard, and I guess he's probably Saruman. But they didn't even say that he's Saruman. So we have done the same thing again, where it's like we're just gonna have to move forward and be like, that's probably it. But maybe there's not a reason why they did it that way, and then it's gonna be like, nope, they just did it that way because I don't
I
know.
still feel like I would hope this is not Saruman, but at this point, who knows?
You don't think that's
Um,
Saruman?
how could it be? He's so not Saruman.
But no, I think he is Saruman. I think he is Saruman.
Maybe I don't know.
Whatever.
Um,
Okay, so the
yeah.
opening scene was really cool, Darren. Durin fighting a Balrog, King Durin fighting a Balrog and jumping up. Pretty cool, pretty awesome, pretty
Okay,
rad.
I want to say this. I have not watched the like inside the episode stuff all
Me
season
neither.
long.
Me neither.
I ended up watching this one for the finale because it auto played after the thing, and I
Okay.
couldn't stop it in time.
Uh-huh.
And I thought it was interesting. First of all, weird format. Felicia Day is like weirdly hosting an interview with the creators in the middle of like an empty studio, but she really doesn't serve a purpose there
So
because
it's a podcast.
it has the look of a podcast, but it's like the inside the episode from House of the Dragon or something, where it's like it's just the guys talking about the thing. It's a weird format. Anyway, um,
I have
I
an
thought
explanation for why I think that is, Taryn, but I'll let you
okay.
continue first. Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting because there were a lot of questions about like how long had you planned for this to happen, or like what did you think about this? And they mentioned that their scene, they had the image of Durin fighting the Balrog, jumping in to fight the Balrog. They had that scene from like 5 years ago. They had that scene in their head.
Sure.
Um, and they knew that they also needed to have a scene where Galadriel confronts Sauron again and has like a confrontation with him.
Yep.
And it to me, like, I don't think this is a wrong way to do storytelling, but like it was not surprising to me at all that they were like, okay, we have some cool scenes in our heads. We definitely want these scenes to happen. How do
Yeah.
we get there? And that to me has been like the big criticism of the show, where it's like we get to these cool moments, some of them are cool at least, but like kind of scribble our way to get to those places, where it's like, how do we make this scene possible where Galadriel is confronting Sauron again outside of the city? And it's like, well, if we do this and then have Adar here, and then he'll take the ring, but then give it back here, and it just feels so convoluted to get to these places. And that's part of what frustrates me, where by the time they get there, it does not have the impact that it should, because I'm just already lost in their meandering. So that to me, I think, was like a big moment listening to them talk about the way that they are developing this story.
That doesn't surprise me. I think you can feel that. I think this is exactly that we've been saying. Is that like I feel like the show is built on the coolest scene, and then they piece the things together to get to that scene, and you can feel it. It has the scenes have been very good. And again, this is the thing. I was just talking about another thing where I felt like I was talking with somebody about the show, and they were like, "It's very good," and then listed off all these things that they don't think is working. And it feels like in the modern day, when you do that, it feels like you're actually saying it's bad, even though the person was saying, "No, I think the show is very good," except these things. So she said the show's very good, but it feels like what you're saying when you list all the critiques. It's like, oh, the show's
When
bad.
you watch that scene with the Balrog, you're like, this is really good.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. But it does feel like that when I come on a podcast and I'm like, okay. But here's the thing. I do feel like there's the way to get from the last thing we saw, which is Elrond being like, "Friend, I need your help. Will you come with me?" To the point where then then the finale of last week's episode is like, "Uh-oh, Durin didn't show up with his army." And then this week, the beginning of the episode is like a bunch of dead dwarfs, and Durin's going to go try to stop his dad. And again, the scene that we then have is really good, but the way that the show was set up to basically like have this moment where Elrond's like, "Uh-oh, Durin isn't coming," meant that we like removed a bunch of scenes that would be helpful for the Khazad-dûm story, but then we wanted to start the finale with the scene where Durin fights the Balrog. So then we couldn't do, you can't have that opening scene be too long. Like they needed to like basically be like big Balrog scene, opening credits. You can't fit so much in there. So it just feels like the pacing and the like connective tissue is is pretty weak and underdeveloped and underwhelming, I think. But then you're like, yeah, well, whatever. It was a big cool Balrog battle where the axe and the Balrog sword clashed, and that was
It
really wicked.
it looked so good.
It looks so good. It looks so good. The whole piece of the opening scene where um the mithril, the like the like look at all the veins that are down here. Look what we could get. Amazing. And then the Balrog shows up, and then the like fight against the Balrog, and then Durin like sacrificing himself to try and fight the Balrog. It looked so good. It was so good. It was so fun. It was amazing.
I think okay, I think I'm coming to a conclusion, which is that the reason why I liked earlier parts of this season is because they leaned more heavily into the fantastical elements, the Ents and the Guardians there, the like zombie creatures in the forest, the stumbling upon the colony of Harfoots at the start of that, the introduction of the wizard Tom Bombadil showing up.
Mhm.
And all of this stuff, like I like that stuff. Like when I saw the Balrog, I was like, oh yeah, this feels right.
Mhm.
And it's a lot of the other, it's when the show feels more human that I'm not as into it, because it doesn't feel like that's working as much for me. It's all this war and stuff. Like, yeah, there's elves fighting and there's like trolls and orcs and stuff like that, but like that just feels so normal at this point to me. That like I want more fantastical elements. I want the fantasy in my fantasy, and I think that maybe that's what I'm looking for in this show, given that I'm not enjoying how they write the more Game of Thronesy kind of elements of like politicking in Numenor or character drama that's just not working for me. Like because of that, I'm like, just give me the fantasy stuff and I'll vibe out on it and I'll have a good time.
Well, there's also the case of I mean, I guess this is like fantasy stuff, but like for me, the Sauron Celebrimbor stuff is amazing, and I think that
That's true. That is the one. That is the human element that worked for me, and it's so strange to me that that was such a standout part. It reminded me a lot of Foundation on Apple,
oh, that's a good
where
thought.
like
Yeah.
yeah, where like there's this cool storyline with the royalty, the emperor
Uh-huh.
line,
Yes.
that is very like character focused and very, I wouldn't say subtle, but like a lot more nuanced. Then there's like the sci-fi action plot going on that is often falling a little flat. Uh, and yeah, I mean, it feels to me like the Sauron, Anatar, Celebrimbor stuff was like this big highlight of the season that they spent a lot of time and effort with. And then some of the other stuff just didn't quite land and didn't really feel like it went anywhere at times. Like, man, Numenor?
I mean, I think there's two big, and I think I can't defend the Numenor story after the finale. Like, I think there was room to do. There's one cool fantasy thing they could have done with Numenor that they decided not to do. And so they're saving it. But and it's funny because you just said, I think what you said was you want more fantasy in your fantasy. But if we just take like, you want fantasy in your fantasy, that's a very fair thing to say. It's a very fair thing to be like, I'm coming to Lord of the Rings of Power, because I want it to be fantasy. And so I agree. I think like, I do think the first half does feel so much stronger. I think there's also a piece of this equation where there are things that worked for me that I think worked less for you, because of the way in which like I was reading the books and doing the things that I can see where they think they're going with stuff.
Mhm.
I think this is not like a slight against you. It's just I think that that's the way the show is designed. That there's a lot of like, but then I will say, and maybe it's like then, shame on me for doing this. But then I feel like the halfling part of the stranger storyline, we didn't do anything with it.
Nothing.
Literally like the purpose of it ultimately ends up being like they name Gandalf. That's
Yeah.
basically the extent because the I thought that the reverse was going to be true of like the reason why Nori meets the Harfoots. No, she's a Har. Oh gosh, I'm gonna get so bad. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The
She
reason
meets
she
the
meets
colony of other people,
so
hobbity people.
so that we as eventually, and we probably still will, but we get to a point where she realizes that like their community should live in a community like the Shire. But instead we got like the reverse where like at the end of the episode, and like again, I liked the little dialogue piece of like this like one little small thing where like they're sending them off because they have to move because their like colony got destroyed. And then there is this little back and forth where Gandalf's like, oh, it's their first time ever traveling, so they don't know. She says they don't know what to take, and he says, and they don't know what to leave behind. I like that. I liked it a lot, but like it's not enough for me to save the thing. And again, it's on me for thinking it was going in a direction that I thought it was going to, and that's not the fault of the show. But ultimately, I feel like the place that they went doesn't really make sense to me and feels very unfulfilling.
If I think about how especially genre shows used to work, they used to be like 20 episodes a season. Like I'm thinking
Uh-huh.
Star Trek, right?
Yep. Mhm.
Um, the content and depth of the Gandalf and Harfoot story this season, I think would have made up one episode of a 22 episode season 2 decades ago, where they meet, and it's an important episode. It's a story progressing
I
episode. It's not a filler episode,
I
but
agree.
like
You'd look back on a list, like, and it'd be like one of the best 5 episodes of Lord of the Rings of Power is the one where Gandalf and Nori meet the Harfoot.
exactly. They meet the Harfoots. It's going to be important later. But then by the end of the episode, their colony gets destroyed and they have to move out. And Gandalf learns the power of friendship for the fifth time. And so on and so forth, right? Like that's genuinely, and it would be a big, important episode. And you can say that, oh, well, we spent a season here a little bit at a time building up that storyline, and sure, that is true, but it had the depth of a one episode arc. It didn't have like, we weren't spending a lot of time there. It wasn't the Sauron Celebrimbor story, which felt like it needed some time to feel like it was progressing properly. This did not feel like it. This could have been a day. This could have been 2 days at most. And so I think that especially as we've talked about with other shows too, when your season takes 2 years to make and it's 70 to 90-minute episodes, and you have the content in one of your storylines of a single 42-minute episode of a show that has 22 episodes. Like you're really stretching thin what you have, and I think that feels very frustrating by the end of the season when you're like, it just doesn't feel dense enough. And given, and it's not that I don't think that this length of season or length of episodes can't work. I just think that if you're going to do this, if this is the length of your season, if this is the length of your episodes, this is how many plot lines you have, you need to make more efficient use of that time, and you need to be diving in deeper to these things and making it feel like it matters and not feel like we just walked in circles for an entire season with multiple plot lines.
Yeah, and just so I can do this so that the people in the YouTube comments can go and delete their post. Nori and Poppy are Harfoots, and they met Stewers. Just so I can just
Stewards. That's
they're
it.
Stewers. Well, the other piece though of that too is like the character who's called Nobody is actually called Merrimack, which is also the name of Mary from Merry and Pippin. But Merry and Pippin are Shire hobbits who are Harfoot.
Are they
Like
the descendants, you think, of?
well, I get, like probably, yeah, like probably, except that this group. So maybe it's, but then it's that there's a little bit of like, but the stewards are now the ones going, but the stewards aren't going to be the ones to create the Shire. It's going to, so like, I would assume that there is more. I mean, I don't think we're ending the series without Nori reuniting with her original.
I'm sure that Nori has more things to do and eventually will be important. It's just like we're 2 seasons deep now.
Yeah, I think that there's a way in which I do feel sometimes we were talking about a season finale, and so I feel better about being like, in totality, for me, this stuff has not worked so far. I feel more bad about it when I come in like in episode 3 and I'm like, what are we doing here? Where are we going? And like, we'll still do it because we come on every episode, but there's a level to which even if by the end of this we look back and be like, oh yeah, that does lead somewhere important and it was all set up, there is a thing that it's not my job to figure it out. It is the showrunner's job to figure out how it doesn't feel dissatisfying at the end of the season, to feel like we spent all this time with Nori and Poppy, who are delightful, but like we didn't really get anything new. I think at most we got some, what I thought was like fun conversation, some interesting things about Tolkien's world that intrigues me, but does not sustain my appetite for the Rings of Power moving forward. That like I need a lot more from this. And like to segue here, if we want to just stick with it, which is this thing that I thought was absolutely silly after last week, where you're like, sometimes I can predict where this is going, and they say the things. And the fact that Gandalf finds his staff and figures it out, and he gives himself his name, and then he's like, well, I better go talk to Tom Bombadil to just absolutely make sure that I learned the exact right lesson I was supposed to learn. And I will say the only thing that saves the thing is, well, at least they sang. You know, they sang a merry little tune at the end of the scene. But like, boy, did that feel. So he goes and finds Tom Bombadil doesn't like show up and be like, "Told you." It's like, it's just like he goes back to be like, "That's what I'm supposed to do, right?" He's like, "Yep." They sit down and sing. Like, come
I
on, we
can't.
trust us more. Trust the audience more, I think, is my point.
I mean, you trust us more considering the fact that I think everybody knew immediately when Tom Bombadil said you have to give up your friends that it was just a test in the first place. We didn't need him to then find the staff and be like, oh yeah, we knew, and then go to Tom Bombadil and be like, so it was a test. I couldn't help but think about, there's a scene at the, no spoilers, there's a scene at the end of Shogun
Oh
where
yeah.
there's like
Mhm.
explanation happening for
Yeah.
some of the things. So well done.
Yeah.
And so the opposite of the scene at the end of the season with Gandalf.
Can I tell you that I don't believe that you need to like bring in people for a season that they have to be in every episode. I actually think that
Mhm.
industry did this really well. Recently, they brought on Kit Harington. He misses like 4 of the episodes in the middle and then shows back up at the finale in a way that I think is incredibly effective. I will say, do you think Kieran Hines and Greg Kinnear were both like tricked into, and they're like, we'll be in the show, right? He's like, yeah. And it's like for sure the season premiere and the finale. Like, okay. Like specifically Kieran Hines is basically in
Don't even get
2
me started on
episodes.
that scene too. Like,
Well, we should, because it's integral actually to this specific story, which is, yeah, it's how we basically, it's like he's like, I'm not a don't call me a dark wizard. I'm not the dark wizard. Didn't you know we're here to fight Sauron? You fool, you idiot. All right, later.
he was
Okay.
a literal mustache twirling villain. like,
Yeah.
like it was so it was Like we can do better than this, guys.
I don't know, but Kieran Hines, take your paycheck for the 2 episodes of Rings of Power. You probably got paid so much money to be in. But just these two popping up to be like, here are the answers to your story, Gandalf. It's like, oh man, okay, come on, whatever. Again, like not the most unwatchable. Like the thing is the production quality of the show makes it extremely watchable. Like
Mhm.
every time they're on the scene, even like I did love the singing at the end of the scene, and I'm the person who's like telling you, and I know you and Josh talked about this, is like when you're reading the Lord of the Rings, you're like, I think I'm just gonna skip over the singing part. Like
Yep.
I found it like such a joke that like as a not the thing as a joke, but it would be like literally so many times in Lord of the Rings. It's like it's like Aragorn being like, and I'm in my head while I'm reading the book, picturing Aragorn. I'm picturing Vigo from the movie, but in the book, it's like, and they're like, but how are you the king? And he's like, let me tell you. And then it's like literally like Aragorn breaks into folk song. Like, I'm like, oh, I don't know that I like it, but I did like the singing here between Gandalf and Tom Bombadil, but it's like the only thing I liked from the scenes. So
I just like I've already a little bit talked about it, but like there was 0 point in the lesson being he needed to pick his friends. We spent an entire season of him developing those friendships and choosing his friends. Like like there was no notion to me that he was not going to choose his friends. It was weird that he didn't get the staff immediately. Like like he was that person. I get it. We were like going, but I just feel like if you're gonna, he's such a blank slate to begin with that it's like I don't know. It was frustrating.
okay, I have two things here. One is I did really like the line where the Dark Wizard, who I will say we do not know who this is, we do not know his name. I liked the line where he's like, "We need to work together and defeat." This is why he's Sauron, because he basically said we're going to work together to take over the
Gandalf
world.
doesn't even know who Sauron is. He's heard of the dude. He has no personal connection to this whatsoever.
Yes, the thing I liked from this, I liked it. I liked where he's like, I'm going to show you a bit of the pain you will face, that the people of Middle Earth will face should we not team together to defeat Sauron. That to me, I thought was effective. And likely, I think that this is like, we got Kieran Hines on the show. I presume we're getting much more. The bar is
I would
low.
assume.
Season 3, Dark Wizard, Sauron, Dark Wizard stuff. Unfortunately, I do think it's going to be very similar, where it's like, it's going to be this like thing of Saruman being like, you need to actually detach yourself from your individual connections in order to save all of Middle Earth. This is like, that's a bit of the theme. Whatever. I feel like that could be very repetitive of what we've done. Nevertheless, I did like that. But the piece about the staff that Tom Bombadil is like, a wizard doesn't, the staff finds the wizard or whatever. What do you mean? How do you know that they're new beings to Middle Earth? How do you know they're actually specifically? He's like, I don't like being called the word wizard. Is like, and they're literally not wizard. They're literally not. They're like, they are, but they're not. And so, how do you know what the lore of wizard Tom Bombadil? How do you know this
He's Tom
information?
Bombadil. He can know
I
whatever he
mean,
wants to know.
to be fair, that is an explanation that literally, if the creator's like, well, he's Tom Bombadil, so he knows everything, I'd be like, fine, that's how I will watch your show moving forward. Tom Bombadil knows every answer to every question, so fine.
I think the worst part of the season though is Numenor for me. Like it really went nowhere. Like literally from episode 1, if they had all if literally episode 1 had been all of the Numenor scenes in episode 1, I would have believed it and been like, yep, that's a logical progression from where we were before. Hair guy wants to take over. He found a thing, uses it to do a coup. Ship guy's on the run, and other dude who's friends with Isildur. I don't know. He's missing, I guess. Like, like literally. It could have been the first episode and we could have moved on. Instead, we spent an entire season going in circles of like the same scene between ship guy and blind queen lady, like over and over. I'm not going to do this. You need to do this. No, I'm not going to do this. You need to. Okay, I'll do it. But I'm not going to do it this time. No, you need to do it this time.
No, that's not true. He got a sword at the end. So now he'll do
He
it.
could have gotten the sword in the first place.
No, he didn't get the sword in the first place, Taran. But now he does, and now he can do it. Now he can do it. Now he can go and do it.
There's an eagle that showed up, and that's a bad sign. But then she gets the sea monster happened, and that was a good sign. But it doesn't matter at all because it's just about her connection to Sauron.
Mm-hmm. No, eagle showing up is a good sign until it's a bad sign, obviously. And sea monsters vomiting you out of the sea is a good sign. This is all you clearly have not read the appendices.
This is the most wheel spinny thing like this show has done by far. Where like by the end of this season, we are exactly where we basically started, and none of what happened in between really matters at all. Like the daughter even having this little mini arc of like turning on him, but then hiding him at the end, like didn't even need to happen in the first place either. Like.
Okay, also, okay, this is like sort of, it's like not quite Numenor, but it's tangential enough. I'm going to bring it up here, which is Josh comes on the podcast to fill in for me. And he's like, so like, we're probably done with Theo, right? And I can't remember if you said like yes or no, or you're like,
No, I didn't think we were done with Theo.
Yeah, you're like, he gets picked up by the tree. So like, we're not done with Theo. And I come on and I'm like, we're probably done with, like, he hasn't shown up again. We're probably done with Theo. And it's like, no, you're like, no, I don't think we're done with Theo. And then the finale, I'm like, hey, Theo's here. And the whole point is that they're basically like, yeah, I think we're done with Theo. It's like, he's like, has a goodbye, which like, maybe we're not done with Theo. I felt kind of like he's not going to go with Isildur.
Listen,
so I think we're done.
We are not done with Theo until he does this.
His hair back. Yeah. No, I mean, I just agree. I can't defend it other than that there is Numenor stuff that is coming that I'm intrigued by, but they didn't do it. So this is the exact same problem I feel about The Stranger, but it's worse. It's like, it's way worse because at least, even though I'm annoyed that it takes the 16th episode of the show to be like, oh, it's Gandalf. Like we have like no connection to any, like Numenor. Like this is the first time we're ever seeing Numenor. And so the idea that you could actually do so much more with it is greater, and they just don't do anything interesting with this. And the one piece, Taran, that is interesting that I want to see is exactly your critique, which is there is a fantasy element that you can insert into this that I think makes it far more interesting. And so far there is zero fantasy element to Numenor other than that it's in a fantasy setting.
I keep forgetting that there's supposed to be like a special society.
They're supposed to be a perfect society of men, like, and I use men as like man, like it's like that's the thing. They're supposed to be like perfect and great, and they don't let elves come. That's the whole thing. And like there's not a single fantasy element to be found in the Numenor storyline, which I think, I mean, except for the one that they did and then they didn't touch upon the rest of the time, which is the magic elf crystal ball. And then they're like, that's just to show that he's evil. It's like, oh, God, okay, all right, sure.
Yeah. Numenor frustrates me to no end. So honestly, I don't think there's much more to talk about.
No, other than that,
he gets the sword.
He gets the sword, and Isildur's coming back, and he leaves apparently the love of his life behind.
Oh my God.
But he built the cornerstone of that. The husband built the cornerstone, and that's when she knew, I didn't love that man who's going to build a home for me. And that's when she knew. So they kiss, and then she's not allowed on the ship because of Pharazôn's evil son.
This was such a bad scene of like her confessing her love for him. Like, you've known each other for like 5 minutes. I liked I thought they had good chemistry when they were introduced. I liked her character. I liked where it was going. I was like, they're gonna get together. It's definitely gonna happen. This like, oh, now she's a little bit bad, but she's not gonna really be bad. And then the little bit of the will they won't let, and then all of a sudden it was like, and now we're married. Except I'm not married because I'm married to somebody else. Bye. Oh no, but I loved you. Oh, don't worry. I don't actually love him. I love you. Now we're married. Wait, you're leaving me? Like, wait, what is happening?
I think that there's a way in which, like, the very first thing we saw, which is that she covers up the brand that she has, which we've talked about, why the branding makes no sense. But nevertheless, it's a thing in the show. She covers up. And I'm like, that's pretty interesting for me. That's at least something that you can insert into the story to make it more than just like a regular love story. But then it doesn't really mean, it didn't mean anything. It doesn't mean there's no, once she's like, other than the moment of him being like, "Oh, you actually secretly might be evil," and she's like, "No, I'm not." Like that's it. That's basically the whole thing. And I don't really want her to like secretly be evil. That's super tropey. Like that's just like if she's actually secretly working for Sauron and loves Sauron, like that's pretty basic. Don't want that. This thing of like potentially, does she like feel like she like learned something from be like that, she's like there are parts of her that because she was like she was living in a place where they were taken over, like there's just so much you could, there's more that you could, there's not so much, there's just more than you can do than they did, and they just basically, yeah, it's basically like, thought she was evil, she's not, I actually love her, oh she's married, she actually wants to be with me, she's actually not allowed to come, okay, see ya.
It's just it's strange for them to have, because I was like, I was into it. I was like, I was happy to ship these two. Like they got me from being into this relationship and being invested in their relationship to actively not being into it, which is a strange thing to do. I think it's kind of hard to do, but they did manage to make me be all out on that relationship. And the thing too is that like I really like Isildur as a character, and I like the arc of how, like, the way that they set him up, where it's like he blames himself for his mother's death, and you know, like his whole arc in season 1 into season 2, knowing where he ends up, it feels like a cool path. But and I liked his little adventures, you know. I liked that storyline. But what they're doing here is just wild and
Well,
ridiculous, and who knows what's going to happen from
Well,
here.
if you know the story that Isildur goes on, which I will not spoil it, but you could go and look, or you know it because you're like people are versed in
You
Lord of
watch
the,
the first 5 minutes of Lord of the Rings,
yeah, yeah.
Fellowship of
There's
the
a
Ring.
there's a thing you could do in terms of like progressing him towards that. That could you, and you could use this character to do that. And maybe that's like using her as a plot mechanic for him, and that's not good. But like there is just more you could do. And I do think that like I don't think that they just did this to basically like, I think it's a thing where they'll probably have some way of like it mattering in season 3, unless they don't like it and they scrap it. Um, but it's just like, yeah, at the end of the season, it doesn't do anything. It's boring. So yeah. Um, so do you want to talk about the actual like, we kind of talked about Durin, but that's kind of it. Unless the other part is basically just like Galadriel and Sauron and the rest of Eregion.
Durin at the end, having his
Oh yeah,
having his wife show up, and then like the other dude, and they're like, "Our problems are not over, though. Your father took some tributes, and oh, also rumors are flying that your claim is not valid. Your brother has support." I was like, "Am I playing a video game?" are we? Are you giving me some quests? Like,
can I tell you that if it feels exact, this is not a compliment. It feels exactly how I end up writing my Dungeons and Dragons campaigns when I'm playing, which is like, I forgot they had a brother. I forgot he had a brother. We haven't had one scene with the brother. So now the brother, and then I'm like, you forgot about your brother. And that's exactly what happened here, which
it's
is, I
very
just,
much like, okay, here's what they're gonna do next season, and look, I'm down for it. Let's do some dwarf politics next season. That sounds like fun. Hopefully, I'm not like sold on their
Taryn, I don't,
politicking.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
As long as there's more Balrog, I'm in. But, but I thought it was kind of funny. Um, the other major part I had an issue with, before we get to anything that was less issuey, was Adar. Um,
Uh-huh.
Adar, aka the plot device. Like, what actually happened with Adar this season? He captured Sauron, knew he was Sauron at one point, might have been while he was captured, might have been after he let him go. Lets him go, does what he tells him to do, captures Galadriel, loses Galadriel, gets the ring after attacking the city, gets the ring, just to give it back to Galadriel, then dies.
Once again, there's ideas in here that I really like, and then I'm like, yeah, but the whole execution of it, no pun intended, Adar gets executed basically. Like, one thing is I like that there is a mirroring between the beginning of the season and the end of the season when Adar kills Sauron and has all the orcs stab him, and then at the end of the season, Sauron has Adar stabbed to death by all the orcs. Good thematic thing that they did. Adar giving the ring back. Like there's what's interesting to me in this storyline is that there are things in the storyline which is basically there is a little bit of the showrunners, I feel like, looking at some of the ways in which Tolkien has been criticized over the years for the ways in which he subconsciously well, the most beneficial read is that it's subconscious racism of like orcs are bad and evil people. And there's been some modern like viewing of that in terms of like the way it plays into like racist trips and things like that. And so I do feel like there's this like thing that they're trying to do in the midst of it, which is like, but what if we have this character who doesn't see orcs like that, who then thinks that there could be peace between orcs and elves, all yada yada yada. But I think you're right that because they need to, they're playing in Tolkien's world and still abiding by all the rules of Tolkien. Like the orcs ultimately end up being just like, I mean, I guess they're like, following Sauron's lead, but they end up just like doing the evil thing at the end of the season. And because Adar is like a creation of the show and not a thing from the book, they also at some point have to be like, he can't actually have been important enough to have made sense to be like in the lore of the book. So then we're gonna like, now he's like written off and he's dead, so I think it's like, I don't know, I'm like, I get it, and I feel like they don't really commit to it in a way that I think makes it effective. And ultimately, I think you're exactly right. Feels like he's completely a plot device to like make sure the ring gets in a way that like the ring can be not in Galadriel's hand as the thing that she needs to do, but ultimately by the end, it actually has to be in Galadriel's. Galadriel actually has to have the ring because those are the people who had the rings.
Yeah, so like that's how I saw it, right? I was like, okay, he's just being used as a plot device. What they said in the like inside the episode thing is that they actually originally planned for Adar to die early in the season. And they were actually convinced by the Tolkien estate, whoever is in charge of like advising them,
I
that
believe
they
it's yeah. There's
wanted.
a Tolkien grandson, I think, who works
Yeah.
as an advisor. Yeah.
So he's their advisor. He actually said, "I want Adar to stick around, a bit longer. I think his ideas are really interesting." Something along those lines. So it was like the Tolkien estate themselves that were like, "We like this." And I've heard that J.R. Tolkien also later had said in interviews at some point like that he had kind of walked back his view of orcs and that they are capable of good. And so I think there's a lot of
Right.
this desire to sort of explore this. But I think, based on what I'm hearing from the showrunners, is that they didn't really have a plan for Adar this season. They just kept him around a bit longer. And so it was less, I think now, that he was a plot device for them to make things happen, and more so that he just had to follow the originally intended plot as an add-on, as an add-on.
That's very good. That's very good.
Just thank you. Just kind of continuing to spout his beliefs and have this ironic death. But like he needs to do all of the things that would have happened if Sauron was just in control of the orc army in the first place. Which is why none of it made sense. And it all just again felt so like wheel spinny. This like the actions of the orcs make a lot more sense if Adar dies in episode 2 and Sauron has been in control of them ever since, leading them to attack the city that he is in, as opposed to like them just happening to betray Adar at the exact moment that Sauron needs to take over that army. And Adar just like weirdly, blindly doing exactly what Sauron wants him to do, even though he knows it's Sauron, and so on and so forth, right? So like, that to me explains, at least in my head, given what they've said, it sort of makes more sense to me why Adar was the way he was this season. And it doesn't help me like it more, but it feels like that's maybe where it happened and why it happened in that way. And it just still never quite worked for me. I feel like it felt like, yeah, we're exploring this idea of like orc rights some more, but they didn't really know what to do with it beyond just like him continuing, because that was part of it. He just kept saying, no, I want to protect them. No, I want to protect them. And then eventually, despite all evidence to the contrary that he's putting them in danger, they're clearly disgruntled. Just no, no.
Well, a perfect example of that is like he has the ring, and then he makes him look like he did before he was corrupted by Morgoth. Then he gives the ring over to Galadriel and is like, "Let's have peace." But that is not what makes the orcs kill Adar. It's just like hand waving nefarious evil Sauron, who's like, no, we gotta kill Adar. But there is like a thing in there that you could do that would be like, you could see how the goblins would be like, and Galadriel even says it. She's like, I've killed more goblins, I've killed more orcs than any other elf alive in history. And he's like, yeah, that's okay. He gives the ring over. And
Yeah,
then
and again, like
there's
I'm
no moment
reminded
where
of
the
like,
orcs are saying like, what the hell,
yeah,
bro? You know?
I'm reminded of like a show I'm liking more, which man, I always forget the name of, Andor, where like the leader of a rebellion is like willing to sacrifice
Right,
lives,
right,
but in a way that like he understands the gravity of it.
right.
And you feel that weight, and you're kind of disgusted by it a little bit, but also like, but is it what's required? And so for that to be a major theme, for that to be the cause of Adar's death, I feel like we did not dive
No,
into it
agreed.
at all. And so it's just, it just feels so, again, shallow to me, and a bit frustrating, especially for a character I really liked in season one, and really still think has a lot of promise because of the ideas he's introducing into the Middle Earth, and just like really challenging, what it means to have the orcs as like your default enemy, like and such an interesting concept for a character, such a cool kind of like counterbalance as like an evil-ish presence that is opposed to Sauron. Like there's a lot of interesting things you can do with him, and I just felt like he was completely wasted, and his character felt like he had no actual drive, or like self-determination, I should say, in the story.
Well, I don't really like, I mean, I don't need to like, you know, laud praise or, give the benefit of the doubt to the people who are probably making a ton of money from Amazon. But at the same time, I think if you want to figure out how to sort of figure out how to navigate that belief, that the thing that J.R.R. Tolkien says, that he's like, he walks back the thing of like orcs could be good, that they're not just like fully this like corruption and manifestation of evil. How
I
you
could be wrong
do
about that, by the way. I just
No,
randomly read
and
it.
I wanted to actually there's a little bit of like the controversy about like who is the consultant for the show is actually something that has come up recently. But I say that knowing that like they want to they feel obligated, or they're excited to explore that, but it's also a prequel series that then has to lead into essentially, like, I guess I haven't seen whether or not, like, a lot of the conversation we've had a lot of the times with how George R. Martin talks about House of the Dragon and how we should not view it as like canon.
Yeah, it
um
has to lead into the movie series where they're having a who can kill the most challenge.
Exactly. So you have to, and I think that their solution to this is like, well, actually the goblins are corrupted by Sauron. That's like the answer that they're giving, but like still it feels a little lifeless. The thing about the Tolkien estate in this thing is that the advisor on the show is Simon Tolkien, who is Christopher Tolkien's son. Christopher Tolkien like is the guy who like posthumously like published a bunch of his dad's work, including the Silmarillion. He also wrote a bunch of and edited a bunch of unfinished works. He wrote all the or he drew all the maps for Lord of the Rings. So he was like heavily involved and connected to his father's work. And he was very protective of his father's work. And there's a bit of like a debate you can start to have. The difference is that Simon is almost, him and his father had an incredible rift and divide over how to approach things like adaptations, and specifically the movies. Simon thought that the more that Peter Jackson is beholden to the books, the less sort of effective they might be able to be as popular movies and a continuation of his grandfather's legacy. Christopher Tolkien thought the opposite, that like the more that you adhere to the books, the more you are, you know, honoring the legacy of his father, J.R.R. Tolkien. There's like, I think that like a lot of people, I think, don't love that Simon Tolkien is the one who's like in working on, like, the advisor from the Tolkien estate on these projects, because he is much less beholden to his grandfather's works. But I think in any scenario like this, there is some version of it's not exactly that clean. It's not like Simon has a complete disregard for his grandfather's works,
Yeah.
and it's not like Christopher Tolkien has a complete and utter like 100% like adhesion to his father's work. So it's somewhere in the middle, but that's sort of been the controversy about Simon Tolkien in particular. Obviously, his father and his grandfather have both passed away. So
I mean,
it's up
like,
to him.
disregarding all of that, how cool
I know,
is
I
it
know.
that,
I know.
like, somebody creates this world, this story, and it's so important to so many people that it's like it leaves a lasting legacy for, like, your son to continue work on it and, like, cherish it, and then his son,
Yep.
you know, sure, they have their own ideas for what it is, and I'm sure that people have opinions on, like, you know, what it means to them and what they think should be done with it, but, like, just what a cool like thing that can happen with art and with the way that these kinds of things touch so many different people. And you know, here we are enjoying our own version of it and having problems with an adaptation, but like it touches so many people. And for like you know, it must be a cool experience to be able to like live that legacy and to really be able to like continue working on it or protecting or, you know, whatever, something that your father or grandfather created.
They also reconciled, I will say, Simon and Christopher
Huh.
before Christopher's death. So it is not like that rift lasted to the very end. I mean, the other thing too is there's this animated there's this anime fantasy movie coming out, I think in December,
Mhm.
Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. So like there's more. I do think it is. I think it's a good thing actually for Lord of the. I mean, like if they can kind of be in a space where like it actually doesn't all have to be connected in a way, I actually think that's like very beneficial for a modern media franchise. That if this anime film can feel like different than you know, I think that that's actually a good thing. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah,
All right. Well,
just
some of the
very yeah. You want to talk about the positives? That's what I wanted to talk
some of
about.
the positives. Of course, the ending of the Celebrimbor storyline. Um, this obviously works in so many ways. He does do a "you said the name of the thing" moment, Lord of the Rings,
He does do
which
that.
I wasn't quite sure if it worked for me, but it was still, again, I would say it wasn't quite what I wanted it to be, but it was definitely like a great ending to this plot line, which has been so effective. Um, and such a cool thing to see this guy who has been manipulated so thoroughly by Sauron to finally get some of his own power and agency back. Would have been nice if it had mattered in any way. But like even just to him to be able to again like take the power back and almost like pity the guy that had so much power over him. It was a cool thing to see, and you could tell that it was bothering Sauron.
He cried. Sauron cried. You got a little tear. You got emotional. I got to hand it to the Charlies, Charles Edwards, Charlie Vickers. I think this is undoubtedly not just my favorite storyline of the season, but I think it's also like I think there's a world where if this is not acted to the level it was, it doesn't work as well.
Yep.
Because like I think that I'm more in the line of like actually kind of like the dialogue. I like the line that Celebrimbor told Galadriel last episode that then she uses at the end of the episode to like inspire the little team there, and then the people on the other elves on the ground, which is that like it's not strength, it's actually light that fights darkness. I like that in terms of like there is a way in which like Celebrimbor's sacrifice, like they, it wasn't his like I don't know. I liked it. I liked the ending. I think that the scene where he's like pelting with arrows is like I feel like I haven't really seen that much before. And then like just slightly tilting the arrows to like
Well done.
that's the
That was well
torture
done.
thing is so good. It's so I feel bad saying it's cool, but it was very cool. So I think that I just really this is to me my favorite part. Charles Edwards, Charlie Vickers as Celebrimbor, and Sauron is undoubtedly the best part of the season. And I thought the ending was mostly very effective. The Galadriel Sauron fight is okay. It's fine. It's fine. It's
It
kind
was
of cool.
fine. Yeah.
It's a fight. Like again, there's a thing where like, yeah, of course they wanted them to have another moment. I didn't mind. I liked the shape shifting thing. I liked like being Halbrand and using that as a moment of like rather than like a parry, like or like being able to block it. It's like he shows up as somebody else, and then in a later moment shows up as Celebrimbor. I think it's a good way of like, yeah, that's the thing he's been doing is like just messing with your mind, and so that's even in a sword crown fight. I guess he also had a sword. That's what happened. I don't know. I liked it. I thought it was good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was fine. It was fine. It's like I think there are ways this could have been more effective. I think that like they've been apart for so long. Like it's been over 2 years since I've seen them together.
That's true.
It's hard to really remember the emotion of the two of them, and it feels and maybe it makes sense character wise, but it just feels wrong to me that he would even think there's a chance of her like joining him or whatever after everything we've seen her go through this season. Like if this had happened at the end of last season, I'd be like, yeah, I don't know about Gladriel. But now here it kind of falls a little flat. But obviously they needed to have some kind of confrontation. Quite frankly, I would have been happy to see them have like a talking confrontation rather than a fight confrontation. That's me. I'm not always the biggest fan of action scenes, especially when they're not like super well. Not that it was poorly choreographed, but like, it felt a little blocked, a little staged at times in terms of like where they were going. So I thought it was fine. I thought as a set piece, as like a figure piece for the season, it didn't quite work, but it was fine.
I'm trying to think about whether or not in season 1 whether episode 7 was the big set piece episode or whether episode 8 was, or and it could have been both as well. I'm just trying to like think back because I wonder if I do feel like there's a lot of this episode that does feel like a little bit of like, all right, I'm gonna tie the knot, and then like, but also look what's coming. There's a lot of that this episode, I feel like. And just trying to see if we can like hone in on a pattern there in terms of like, was this fight supposed to feel like the end fight of the season, or like is the actual like Sauron messing? Like, it probably is, right? Because like the thing we got last week is mostly like the Celebrimbor finding out that Sauron is evil thing, and that's not really like. Then they're tying it back to like where we're gonna go, which is Galadriel against Sauron. So, yeah, there was a speech I liked at some point. I'm trying to find it in my notes where it's like I think it's actually Poppy who gets the speech that I like, which is this thing of like sometimes bad stuff happens, and it's all these moments of like you get like Elrond looking back at Eregion having been destroyed, Durin's looking at the empty throne, like everybody's looking at the thing. I believe Isildur is looking at the woman who I can't remember her name, who's not coming with him, like Estrid. Yeah, it's here where like, yeah, Poppy gives this speech of like some things are lost forever. No matter how hard we fight, no matter how much their heart yearns to put them back together, the world's so much bigger. This whole speech about like what's broke is broken, won't fix, and all anybody else can do is try and build something new. And the last shot is Sauron holding the forging hammer. I liked that monologue I liked that like montage a lot of like as a theme of the story of like this was kind of the season of like people losing stuff, and Poppy giving this sort of inspiring like, but you have to keep going. That's a theme that works for me. But yeah,
Yeah. All right. Was there anything else
there's
from?
two small lines of dialogue. Can I point out that I actually quite liked? One is when Poppy says to Gandalf, "Don't be a stranger." That's very funny. That's very funny because I called him a stranger. The other one is when Kemen, who is Farazan, he does a thing of saying, "Why don't we feed all these people your beloved horse?" Like, oh man, that's so evil. That's so what an evil thing to say to all the
Still,
poor.
genuinely, in my opinion,
Hmm.
the best part of Numenor is Kemen.
I agree. I think I agree. Yeah.
He makes me feel something.
Yeah, he's a I hate him. I will say, I I think it's ultimately fine, but there's a part of me when like the last scene is like Galadriel, Gil-galad, Elrond, also Arondir is here as well. I'm like, I get it. I get because like the hate that he got for being in the show is completely unfair and undeserved. And again, the thing is like they're trying to make a correction, I think, for the thing that Tolkien did, which is all the important characters and all the elves are white. And so like I get it that he's there. And also I'm like, he's not one of the three elves who has a ring. Like it's just like, okay, whatever, fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I also like weren't we asking like last episode like is he gonna survive? And then in this episode, not even a hole in the armor.
There's a yeah, is that where we picked up? Like they're fighting and then
He just shows up fighting like nothing happened.
yeah. Yeah, they did burn all of Celebrimbor's thing, which actually was like
They really
actually genuinely mad at. So yeah, yeah.
Okay, that too, like I also would have been mad at it if I like that had been introduced to me earlier in the season.
Sure.
To me, it was just like,
Sure.
here's this really important thing. Oh, because like literally it had to be introduced by Elrond. Like, no, don't do that. That's a really important, irreplaceable thing that we'll never be able to get back, and it will be really, really bad if you do it. Please don't kill us instead. It's like, we're going to anyway.
Philly taught me this lesson about being a dungeon master. He said one time, let your characters fall in love with things so that it pains them emotionally when you take them away. And I would say that probably what Philly was not for me intending for me to do was to within 10 minutes of it saying, look at all these fancy books that your character loves, and then to immediately burn them. So I agree with you. We maybe should have given at the beginning. He literally comes back. He comes to Oregon. We could have done a whole thing about like people being like, and maybe they did, and I'm forgetting it. But whatever.
They might have,
like,
but yeah, I
like,
forgot.
All my important books, and like literally in episode 3, so that in episode 8, when they burn, it's sadder. But, yeah. Anyway,
Elrond in general, that actor gives some great smoldering looks.
I agree. I like him a lot. I feel like he doesn't. The one thing I have a hard time doing is like, it's not how Elrond looks in the movie. And I'm not a person who's like, I am not like, let's find the person who most looks like a character to be the character. I actually think that's actually a bad. We can all just be like, oh, they can't cast Hugo Weaving as Elrond. So like, of course, we're gonna have somebody else be in the role. But the hairstyle, he's gonna at some point in the show, right? We're gonna get a moment where he's gonna like redo his hair like Hugo Weaving.
And
right?
what a shame it'll be.
I know he has great hair.
Yeah,
I agree. I like
honestly like I like when I watch Elrond on this show, I'm like, oh, you have to turn into Hugo Weaving.
Yeah, this is Robert
like
Arameo. I like him. I like him a lot. Yeah, he's young Eddard in Game of Thrones.
Yes,
so, yeah.
yes. So there was some good stuff from him, but
wait, that's funny because then he played young, basically Boromir, like, but he's actually young Hugo Weaving. That's funny.
Yeah.
Anyway,
his storyline seems to like conclude with like, fine, I'll trust the elven rings if it's to save Galadriel's life.
Yeah.
Which is fine, I guess. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not
in kiss
like,
last episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, like, okay, I didn't realize that like trusting the elven rings was like a super important thing. Maybe I'm not like up on the lore enough for that to register for me, but like,
What trusting the rings?
yeah,
What
like
is
he
it?
didn't trust him in the beginning of the season. He was like super anti-ring, and then his arc this season is that he became pro-ring.
Do you? I'm gonna ask you. We're not gonna like, but do you remember how the rings are used in the Lord of the Rings?
No.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he had one though.
Yeah. 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 I won't say.
Yeah.
I won't say. Mhm.
All right. So I think that's mostly it. I think for me, maybe, I actually liked season 1 a lot more than most people did. So I came into season 2 expecting to really enjoy it, but maybe not be like it's not like the best thing in the world. Then the
Yeah.
first few episodes really got me invested. I was like, "Oh man, I really think they've stepped up their game. I'm really into this. I'm really enjoying it." And I think it got my expectations a little too high for the back half.
Mm.
It's certainly not a show I'm going to give up on. I'm still going to watch this thing all the way through. It is not nearly bad enough to like not watch it. But I think for me, heading into season 3, personally, I need to step my expectations down a little bit. I even say I came in saying it's the vibes. I just want to vibe out on this show, and clearly, while I have enjoyed the vibes, I have also been looking for more than just vibes, and I just want to make sure that I go into next season just riding the vibes, not expecting too much from it. Maybe not paying as close attention to it as I did this season, so that I can just kind of like just enjoy the ride, because I do think there's a lot to enjoy: the visuals, the acting, and the vibe. So that's my plan for season 3 in 2 years,
Yeah.
assuming it gets renewed.
It's close apparently. I think that it's very fair that if people come to our podcast and feel like I think there's actually, it's very interesting because I feel like just from general things I see in the YouTube comments, I think we're kind of getting from both sides. Like there are people who I felt like, especially after last week, were like, oh yeah, that what you're saying about having great moments that the connection points are not there is actually how I'm feeling. I think that there's probably a sense that like we're not hearing it much, but I think there are probably people who are watching the show, turning off Amazon Prime and being like, that was fun. And they go on with their life. And
Yeah.
they're not looking for the extra bit
I
of
want to be one of
podcast.
those people next season.
I think that that's completely fair. And I think that like, yeah, if you were not like coming on and we're talking through all of the different storylines, like you would probably more be like, yeah, Numenor is boring, but like, yeah, whatever, as opposed to like, maybe not. Maybe Numenor is the exception. Maybe it's more like the stranger stuff that you would be like, yeah, it's kind of like nothing's really happening, but like, whatever, and just hanging out with them. But no, we're talking about the episode for almost an hour every week, and so I don't think it's as bad as the people who think it's extremely bad
Yeah.
say it is. And
It's
so
not an abomination. It's not an insult to the whatever. Like,
no,
it's a good. Honestly, if I had to rate this season,
oh, fun.
um, it's I think it's a 7 out of 10.
That's exactly what I was just thinking as you were
Yeah.
thinking. I think I would have said 7 out of 10. And that's a
Yeah.
lot to do with things that are not as uh they're not as like interesting to talk about on they're not, it's like
Yeah.
saying the Balrog looked cool is about
Exactly.
the extent of which we can compliment the show for the Balrog being cool. So it's tougher. So if you watch the show as well and you did choose to listen to us and you feel like you're on the spectrum in which you enjoyed it more, and feel like they're so down on it, I actually don't think our opinions would be that much. I think probably like, unless people think it's a 10 out of 10, which I'm so happy you got a 10 out of 10 show from the Rings of Power. That's so cool. I liked a lot of it. I liked some scenes. This show actually also, I think, will stick in my brain a lot in terms of the way that the moments that are good are executed.
Mm.
I will be like, oh yeah, like Durin leaping off to fight the Balrog. Like I'm gonna remember that scene. There's still stuff from season 1 that I feel like is like entrenched in me. The arrows, I think in Celebrimbor, like standing up with all the arrows in him. I'm like, that's so rad. So I think visually it's a pretty stunning piece of television, which makes sense. It costs a lot of money, dude.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
did.
Mm-hmm.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, I think that's a wrap then on
Ooh.
season 2 of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power.
Yeah.
That's what we got. If you have joined us along the way and you are not listening to our other podcast, The Tastemakers, make sure you come and do so, because that is where we will be if you want to hear more talk about television, what we think is good, what we think is bad. On top of like other news this month in October, we will be talking about horror. What I thought in particular was interesting about this like torture scene of Celebrimbor was that, like, as a fan of horror, I am often quite desensitized to violence and gore and such. What I thought was effective about that scene was like it doesn't feel like it's that often that you see a human used as like a pincushion with arrows.
Yeah.
Like the ease with which he shot at him like he was a target, it was I think a huge part of what made that effective. And that is often what I'm looking at with horror as well, where it's like, how can you make this actually feel gross or violent to me when I'm so used to watching this stuff over and over. So if you want more takes on horror this month, tune into the Tastemakers, but we will also be talking about plenty of other things as well. And there's other TV coverage happening at this time also, Grace.
Yes, we wrapped up our industry coverage, but you can check out that's in the feed for you to listen to. I also did some bonus industry coverage over on the Crying Laughing podcast that should be out soon. I did a bonus pod on Will and Harper, the Netflix documentary. I did that with Dr. Avi Jagoda and chatted a little bit with Chappelle about it. It's a lovely documentary that I think everybody should watch. And then The Penguin. Mike Bloom and I are chatting about The Penguin, which is the new HBO Sunday night slot show. So check those out. They're all in the feed. Make sure you're subscribed to the We Know Scripted TV feed.
All right. Well, that's it then. Thank you all so much for joining us this season on The Rings of Power. And somewhere or another, hopefully, we'll see you next time.